Now on BBC Two, Belfast's Jewish community comes under the spotlight in Odd Men In.
The passengers applaud when the plane arrives here. Ben Gurion Airport, Tel Aviv, Israel. It's an important part of our story. It's an important part of practically any Jewish story. The Passover service in the home contains the key prayer, next year, please God, in Jerusalem. These are Israelis coming home, or maybe they're Jews from Manhattan, or Jews from Bucharest, or maybe they're like me, Jews from Belfast. We're an odd lot, the Belfast Jews. Ireland never persecuted the Jews, says an Ulster character in James Joyce's Ulysses, because she never let them in. That's not true. A couple of years ago, I made a television film here in Belfast. It was based on a short story, and I wrote the short story because of something that happened to me here in my youth, an incident that took place just a few yards from here. I used to come here in the 30s to the Jaffe school for early evening Hebrew classes, and one dark December night, I emerged through the gates and I was confronted by three youths. And the tallest of the trio got hold of the lapels of my coat and he stuck me up against the school railings. And he said, "Here, boy, what foot do you kick with?" Now, I knew what he meant. He meant, was I a Catholic or was I a Protestant? What I was at that particular moment was a terrified 10-year-old. There was only one thing to do, and that was to brazen it out with the truth. And I said, well, I don't kick with either foot. I'm a Jew. And there was a complete and utter silence. And the big fella looked round at the other two, and he said, "Here, do you hear what your man says? He says he's a Jew." "Well, here, boy, tell us. Are you a Protestant Jew or a Catholic Jew?" You know, that's not a music hall joke. It actually happened. And I have a hunch it was quite a common happening around here. Common to an uncommon people. People who formed the community founded by this family.
You're going to go back to around about 1840 when Daniel Joseph Jaffe came over here. I believe he was invited over by, if I'm not mistaken, it was from the Richardson family. They're a very well-known linen company here. I'm not terribly sure of the precise designation, but I think it was Richardson and Arden was the name of the company, and he was in the linen business, and they encouraged him to come here and to set up an export house. And not only did he come here, he brought his family over here, and they rather unique contribution to Northern Ireland because they really were the dominating family, and they were very much committed to the local scene because, after all, one of their sons, I think his name was Martin, was one of the founders of the Belfast Chamber of Commerce, and Otto, who was really outstanding, was High Sheriff of Belfast in the 1890s, and he became Lord Mayor in the early 1900s. And they were the predominant family, and no doubt about it.
Daniel Jaffe headed the first influx of Jews. Cultured, cultivated Germans who brought with them that rare commodity to Ulster, prosperity. Jaffe's little memorial fountain sits quietly in the Botanic Gardens by the River Lagan. I wonder how many passing commuters or passing joggers are aware of this tribute to the founder of Belfast's Jewish community and a key figure in the development of Ulster's linen export trade. Daniel Jaffe died on holiday in Nice in January 1874 and was buried, as was his wish, in a small walled-off plot in the old city cemetery allocated by the Corporation for Jewish Burials. But the main Jewish cemetery is now at Conmoney. Anglicized names tell a story of assimilation, but for these people it has been assimilation on their terms. They have remained a strictly Orthodox Jewish community. And this is the grave of my grandfather. He came over here with the second wave of Jewish people. East European Jews. They were persecuted by the Tsars, practically penniless. They didn't even speak the language of their own country, only Yiddish. But they were rich in their own culture. These close-knit religious communities had been banished by the Tsars to the bleak wastes of Western Russia, Latvia and Lithuania. They had multiplied sixfold during the 19th century and numbered more than 6 million souls. They made little effort to assimilate and suffered pogrom after pogrom. In 1881, the persecution reached its height. The Western world was largely unsympathetic. The Manchester Guardian wrote, "It is better they live a life of sorrows in their native place than bear the shame of famine, and perish in destitution in a strange land." Yet still they came.
They managed to escape from Tsarist Russia, and they came as far as Hamburg. And not being familiar with the situation there, they bought tickets to New York, as they thought. But they didn't arrive in New York at all. They arrived in Hull.
Why?
Don't know, because they'd been conned. But for the Irish settlement, I think it was more by accident than design that a few Jews landed in all places in Limerick.
But Belfast and the north were to beckon, because for the Limerick Jews, alas, the persecution wasn't over yet. Kosher ritual slaughtering offended the local people and led to attacks on Jewish homes. In vain, the Cork Examiner protested. The Jews will never be convinced of the truth or beauty of Christianity by battering in their doors with stones. So the refugees ventured north to Belfast, where Great Victoria Street was the site of the first synagogue built by the prosperous German-based community. By now, they also had their first rabbi.
Some of them lived sufficiently close enough to be able to walk to Great Victoria Street on a Shabbos morning. That's on the Sabbath day. And there were some bright young men in the community, one of them who actually was quite well known, a commercial by the name of Harry Miller, and his cousin Max Miller went around the town collecting, literally, pennies. He says, "We're going to build our own synagogue. We can't walk to Great Victoria Street." So Jaffe says, "Don't worry," he says, "I'll arrange with the Belfast City Tramways that you'll travel for free." But then he realised that this really wasn't possible, that as I have to do, and as it is incumbent on those of us who observe the Sabbath, we have to walk there and walk back. So they collected a few pounds.
You mean you wouldn't accept the free tram ride?
No way, no way, not at all. Not at all, don't even use an umbrella. And anyway, Sir Otto Jaffe, it came to his ears, he says, "All right, so you're not going to come to Great Victoria Street. How much money have you collected?" And they had collected several £100, which was a sizable sum in the early 1900s. He says, "Give me what you've collected and I'll build you a synagogue." And he did.
And that was Annesley Street.
That's where you used to worship, Harry, and where I used to go to assiduously on a Shabbos morning.
And this is the synagogue I attended, or rather, the synagogue I tried not to attend. I much preferred the Saturday morning film show at the Crumlin Road Picture House. But if my father saw me first, it was here I would come. This place brings back a host of memories. If the service got a bit boring at Passover time, we used to come out here in the street and we'd play a fairground kind of a game with shoe boxes. And the currency we won or lost was hazelnuts. But the shining memory of this place was Rabbi Schachter. An imposing figure. To me, every inch a Jewish archbishop. But as the First World War approached, there was little dignity left for the Jaffe family who had founded this synagogue. Today, a physiotherapy unit for a local hospital.
Unfortunately, there was a very strong anti-German feeling at the time. It was understandable at the time. It was unfortunate for Sir Otto, and he and his family were obliged to leave Belfast.
Because of his German origins?
German antecedents. Even though he was Jewish, we were told that his carriage was stoned in the streets of Belfast, which seemed rather sad. And that was the end of the Jaffe dynasty in Belfast.
A little more than 2 decades later, the irony of the Jaffe's fate became crystal clear. One wonders why the Jewish communities in Britain and Ireland were slow, almost reluctant, to offer assistance.
They shared with the British government an incredulity. They just didn't believe that these things were really happening in Germany. And in the early days, they were inclined to take it all with a pinch of salt. But once they were convinced of what was happening and the need to help, they really were magnificent in the way they swung in to help. The first move, understandably, was towards the south. Approaches were made for the establishment of a refugee centre in the south. And you're well aware that international relationships were a bit delicate, and de Valera wasn't at all happy. He demurred at the idea of any formal connection of this sort, and he wasn't at all encouraging. So they decided to look for a centre in the north.
And surprisingly enough, this is where they found it. Or rather, they found Mr. Gorman, who was then manager of this once famous Belfast hostelry, which was known as Mooney's. Now, the enterprising Mr. Gorman, in order to make a few bob on the side, he used to buy damaged flax. And he would take this flax and re-bleach it on a farm, a derelict farm that he owned outside Malile. And Barney Hurwitz, in his capacity as linen merchant, came to see Mr. Gorman's flax. And this stuff, it was stretched out on fields, and these fields hadn't been ploughed in years. But what Barney Hurwitz saw was the potential of the place. And later that day, over the counter here in Mooney's Bar, he concluded a deal which gave the Belfast Refugee Aid Committee a 20-year lease on what came to be known as the Malile Farm.
A disused farm with nothing working and nothing running, and a house which was closed up and musty, and a barn outside which was full to the eaves with dung and manure and anything else you could think of. Once the farm was established and they needed more help to get local experience, they had a man named Muckle who came from these parts.
He came to help us because our furrows, when we ploughed them, weren't straight enough. So he helped along, and we learned ploughing the Irish way.
And they came here from the very beginning with the idea of training to become agricultural workers in Palestine eventually. And they never lost sight of this ideal. This was why this was really only a transit camp for them.
I remember, for example, that there was a cobbler shop. They ran horticulture. There was market gardening. I remember it very well. I don't remember any livestock as such, but I certainly remember going out in the very early morning and working in the horticultural end of things. I came here, I applied to come down to be allowed to train in the same way as the refugees were being trained. One time was the man who was in charge of the allocation of labour around the farm. The first thing he said, right, get out and make some bricks. So I said, well, bricks are easy to make. So he gives me a big machine, and it was to make breeze blocks. It wasn't bricks. It was, you know, the breeze block. So another guy and I were told to make these breeze blocks, and we asked him how many we had to make. You will make 150 blocks today. So we said, fair enough, we'll try it. And after about an hour, we realised we were on a good thing, because we were really going hammer and tongs at it. And by dinner time, we had made our quota. So we walked off the job. We'd finished. He told us to make 150 blocks. That was it. The next morning, I appeared for work, and believe me, it was all changed. He was standing there, grim, Martinet, you will make 300 blocks today. So that was it.
One day, we around lunch hour, we sneaked away to have a swim. So we left our clothes on the beach, and there was an island out on the about a few hundred yards away from the coast. We swam out to that island,